I'll tell you what, leadership doesn't just get easier because it's the holiday season. Expectations stay high, energy usually drops, and people are watching how you carry the pressure. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how strong leaders protect performance without burning people out, including themselves. Hi, and welcome to the Everyday Diplomat. I'm Michael Forras, a retired Marine Sergeant Major, former U.S. diplomat, and somebody who spent the better part of 20 years leading high-performing teams through crisis, conflict, and constant change. From combat zones to manufacturing floors, one truth has always stayed consistent. Leadership is tested the most when demands stay high and energy runs low. And that's exactly what makes this season such a powerful leadership proving ground. You see, for many leaders, the holidays are not a slowdown. They're a convergence. End-of-year closeouts, they're in full swing. Manufacturing and production, they're pushing to hit numbers really hard. Sales teams are chasing those final targets, and deadlines don't move just because the calendar says December. At the same time, life outside of work begins to speed up. Travel schedules get absolutely insanely complicated. Family expectations are increasing through the roof, and you're trying to be present at home without letting things slip at work as well. You don't want to be disappointing the people who rely on you professionally or personally. There are gifts to buy, budgets to manage, and somehow, in the middle of all of that, that darn elf on the shelf keeps on reappearing like it's part of the operational plan. Damn that elf. None of these pressures exist in isolation. They stack upon each other, and when pressures stack, leadership habits are completely exposed. This is why the holiday tests leadership more than almost any other time of the year. It's not because the work is harder than usual, but because the margin for error is absolutely thinner, while your attention is completely divided. Decisions still need to be made, the conversations still need to happen, standards still need to be protected, but now you're doing it while carrying more cognitive and emotional load than most of the rest of the time of the year. That's where a lot of leaders begin to struggle. Not because they're incapable of doing it, but because they underestimate how much of their own steadiness matters in moments just like this. When pressures rise from every single direction, teams don't just need more urgency layered on top of it. They need clarity, they need predictability, and they need leadership that doesn't just add chaos to an already demanding environment. This is the moment where leadership shifts from output to posture. And hey, if this feels familiar, if you're trying to lead well while everything else feels compressed and demanding all at the same time, this is exactly the type of leadership conversation that we try to have here every week. Subscribe if you want to keep growing and to see how far you can go as a leader, especially when the conditions are not ideal, because the way that you lead during this stretch, it says a lot about the standards that you actually keep. There's a moment in leadership that rarely feels dramatic, but it's one of the most consequential moments that a leader can have. It's the moment that you accept a lower standard. You see, most leaders, they tell themselves that lowering of the standard is temporary. Just for the holidays, just until things begin to calm down a bit. Just because everybody is stretched completely thin. But teams don't experience it in that same way. The moment that you accept a lower standard, you haven't just paused it, you've actually completely reset it. That decision becomes the new benchmark. Leadership doesn't work on intent, it works on pattern recognition. Your team is consistently learning what actually matters to you by watching what you choose to enforce and what you choose to excuse. When a deadline slides without discussion, that becomes the standard. When poor communication is tolerated because everybody is busy, that becomes the new standard. When preparation slips and nothing is said, you've just created another standard. Leaders often believe that they're showing empathy in these tough, trying moments, but in reality, they're creating ambiguity. And look, ambiguity is far more stressful for teams than high expectations ever are. There's an important distinction here that strong leaders need to understand. Adjusting how you lead during the holidays is incredibly responsible, but lowering what you expect is absolutely not. You may change timelines, you might simplify processes, and you might even narrow your focus, but the standards, the behaviors that actually define things like quality, safety, accountability, and more importantly, trust, Those things have to remain intact because once that standard drops, your team immediately recalibrates. It's not out of laziness, it's out of logic. You see, people align to what the system is actually rewarding and what it tolerates. And reclaiming a lowered standard is always harder than protecting it in the first place. This is why leadership during high pressure seasons, they demand a lot of discipline, not indulgence. Your team doesn't need perfection from you, but they do need consistency, especially when everything else feels unstable. Once standards are set, something even more powerful begins to take over. Signals. Your team is always watching you, but during high pressure seasons like this, they're watching more closely than ever. They're watching how you respond when the plans change, and they're watching how you speak when time is very short. They're also watching whether pressure makes you sharper or more reactive. And here's the part that I see a lot of leaders underestimate. It's that your team does not just hear what you say, but they completely absorb how you carry the stresses of each day. If urgency shows up as tension, that tension is going to spread. If pressure shows up as impatience, that impatience is going to multiply and take over. And look, if uncertainty shows up as inconsistency, you're going to get nothing but confusion afterwards. Leadership behavior is incredibly contagious, but so is calm. When a leader stays steady, even when the pace is high, it gives people the permission they need to stay focused instead of becoming frantic. When a leader communicates clearly and makes decisions very deliberately, it reduces the cognitive load on absolutely everybody on the team. This isn't about suppressing emotion or pretending that things are easy, but it's about discipline. It's the discipline in tone and presence and how pressure moves through the organization. Because teams, they don't need leaders who absorb pressure and then explode it outward. They need leaders who absorb pressure and then convert it into direction. This is especially true during the holiday season. See, people are already stretched. Their attentions are divided. Their emotional bandwidth it's a little bit thinner than usual. And in moments like this, a leader's posture can either stabilize the environment or completely destabilize it further. And here's a question that's worth asking yourself. What is your team learning from how you are showing up right now? Not from your intentions, but from your actual behaviors. You see, if you're willing to take a moment and just name one behavior that you know your team is watching closely this week, I want you to go ahead and then drop it in the comments below, because awareness is often the first real step towards better leadership. Because whether you realize it or not, you're teaching your team how to respond to pressure by your example every single day. For a lot of high-performing leaders, rest feels incredibly uncomfortable. And it's not because they don't value it, but because they equate momentum with their worth. You see, if they're not operating at 100% all the time, it feels like they're falling behind. If you're wired this way, like a lot of us are, the holidays can feel especially frustrating. You're still accountable. The mission still matters. The pressure has not gone anywhere. And yet your energy is not what it normally is. Here's the really hard truth that a lot of high performers need to hear. Operating at full throttle when your environment and your people can't sustain it, it's not great leadership. It's just a lot of noise. You see, rest is not disengagement, but it can be viewed as preparation. And for leaders, rest doesn't always mean time off. It often means intentionality. Intentional use of energy, of decision-making, intentional presence instead of constant output. Strong leaders know when to push and when to conserve, not because they're easing the standards, but because they understand what sustainability brings. If every interaction carries nothing but urgency, then urgency loses its meaning completely. If every issue that you come across is treated like a crisis, people are going to burn out and judgment's going to begin to degrade. This is especially dangerous during high-pressure seasons like the holidays. Exhausted leaders make very short-sighted decisions. They react instead of respond. They spread pressure instead of direction. Intentional leadership means asking a different question altogether. Not how do I do more, but where does my attention matter the most right this moment? You see, sometimes the most disciplined leadership move, it's actually slowing your response by maybe 10 minutes so that you don't create 10 hours of confusion after. That is not lowering your standard, that is absolutely directing it. One of the most important roles that a leader plays, especially during a high pressure season like the holiday season, is acting as a pressure valve for the team. Pressure is going to be unavoidable. There's always going to be deadlines, expectations that are competing, big priorities, but all of it is incredibly real. But what separates the strong leaders from the struggling ones, it's not whether or not they experience the pressure. It's what they do once they do experience it. You see, teams, they should feel direction, not your stress. When leaders allow that pressure to actually leak into every conversation, every meeting, and then every interaction, the entire team stops thinking clearly. Decision-making is going to slow down, the mistakes are going to go through the roof, and people become reactive instead of deliberate. It's not because they don't care anymore, but because the environment becomes emotionally noisy. The strongest leaders, they absorb the pressure, and then they translate that into clarity. They decide what matters the most, and then they make that unmistakable. They remove obstacles instead of adding commentary. They simplify priorities instead of stacking urgency. And this doesn't mean that leaders hide reality or pretend that things are easy. It means that they're disciplined in how reality is actually communicated. There's a difference between transparency and emotional dumping. Transparency gives people context and direction, but that emotional dumping, it transfers anxiety without adding any value. During the holidays, this distinction, it matters more than ever. Your team is already managing full workloads alongside those personal obligations, the travel, the fatigue, and when leadership adds unnecessary urgency or visible layers of frustration, it compounds the load. Calm is not passive, it is controlled strength. When a leader speaks steadily, they make decisions deliberately, and they remain predictable under pressure, it creates that space for the team to execute really well. And here's the really quiet truth. Your team doesn't need you to feel less pressure. They need you to carry it better, though, because when pressure is carried well at the top, it doesn't have to be carried by everybody else. One thing never changes in leadership. People are always going to be watching you. And I don't mean this in a critical way or a weird stalky way, but in a really human way. They're watching to understand what's safe, what matters, and what type of behavior is rewarded or discouraged. And during high pressure seasons just like this, those observations begin to intensify. When leaders are calm, that calm is going to spread. And when leaders are reactive, that reaction begins to multiply. You see, when leaders are inconsistent, uncertainty is what begins to fill those gaps. This isn't about charisma, it's about emotional posture. You see, your team mirrors how you carry yourself far more than they follow the words that you say. If you stay steady, you speak deliberately, and you remain predictable under all that pressure, you give people something incredibly solid to anchor to. You see, that steadiness becomes permission. It's permission to focus instead of panic, permission to execute instead of guess, also to trust that the leadership actually has control of what appears to be controlled madness, I think. This is why leadership presence, it actually matters more than the volume of your leadership. You don't need to say more during high pressure weeks. You need to be a lot clearer. You don't need to show urgency in every single action, but you do need to show consistency. And this is where I think a lot of leaders misunderstand what their influence means. You do not have to be perfect, but you do have to be steady and consistent. Every reaction teaches your team how to react, and every tone that you choose, it teaches them how to speak under pressure. Every decision teaches them what actually matters. And as the year closes and demands remain high, I want you to remember this. Your calm, it's not just for you. It is actually a leadership tool. The habits that you practice right now, they don't stay in December. They actually go forward with you, so make sure you take them with you. The way that you communicate under pressure this week, the standards that you protect when it would be easier not to, the tone that you model when your energy is at its lowest, those are the behaviors that become the foundation of the entire year ahead. This is why the first 30 days of a year, they matter more than most leaders actually realize. You see, they're not about those dramatic changes. They're about establishing patterns of clarity, of accountability, most importantly, patterns of trust. Many leaders, I think they entered January already behind the curve, not because they lack talent, but because they're recovering from the inconsistencies instead of building that momentum. That is exactly why I built the first 30 days course. It's designed to help leaders just like you establish clarity early, protect standards under pressure, and then set that tone so that they're not spending the rest of the entire next year trying to fix those avoidable problems. If you're stepping into a new role or inheriting a team, or if you simply want to reset how you lead in this year ahead, then that resource exists to help you. It's not theory, but it's practical real-world leadership. They're habits that actually hold up when conditions are not ideal. Because leadership momentum is not created by motivation. It's created by consistency. So if you're interested, I want you to go ahead and click on that QR code that I think it's on this side. I never know where that silly QR code is going to be. But if you can't find that QR code, but I know it's going to be here, the URL to that class is going to be in the description below. Look, the holidays don't pause leadership. They simply reveal it. They reveal what standards you chose to protect. They reveal how you carry pressure, and they reveal what your people can count on from you. Leadership is not proven when energy is high and conditions are perfect. It's proven when demands stay really high and your energy is at its lowest. So as you close out this year, I want you to remember this. You don't need to lead louder. You just need to lead a lot more steady. Thank you for spending part of your time with me today. I really genuinely appreciate you being here, engaging in these conversations, and thinking deeply about how your leadership affects other people. I wish you and your family a very Merry Christmas and a meaningful holiday season. And as always, I'm Michael Forras, and this is the Everyday Diplomat.